Chapter 1. The Suitcase. He placed the suitcase gently on the bed, its old leather edges worn soft by time. The same suitcase that had once carried dreams of a future, of a home, of building something real, was now being filled with silence. Not just clothes, not just his wedding suit, but years of things unsaid. She stood nearby, watching him, not speaking, just watching. The suitcase creaked as he opened it, and for a moment, the room held its breath. Her eyes didn't blink. Her hands stayed still. But her mind ran far back to when he first came to her, years ago, carrying that very suitcase. Back then it was a symbol of beginnings. Now it felt like an ending dressed in soft, familiar leather. She had already laid out the clothes he would need, folded them neatly. His shirts, his socks, his carefully ironed wedding suit. She even placed his cologne bottle next to them, though she couldn't remember the last time he used it. Except maybe their wedding day. Yes, that was it. It had smelled sharp then, too. A little strange, like something that didn't quite belong. He reached for the bottle and dabbed a little onto his neck. She watched him quietly, her thoughts louder than ever. That scent, it didn't belong in this room anymore. It didn't belong to her anymore. Her hands twitched, not to touch him, but to touch the suitcase, to close it, to stop it. But she didn't move. "It's a small suitcase," she finally said, her voice soft like dust. "You won't get much more in." He didn't answer at first, just glanced up at her. That same face, plain, pale, familiar, not beautiful, not ugly, just steady, just hers. He had never needed more than that. Not until now. She was still wearing her light blue samfu, her hair pinned up neatly the way married women wore it. She was a picture of calm, a picture she had been trained to become. "It's enough," he said. "I don't have so many things to put in." No, she thought. But there's so much you're taking away. She turned to the pillows on the bed, began fluffing them with nervous fingers. They needed washing. Everything needed washing today, the sheets, the curtains, the memories. Her eyes flickered toward the suitcase again, still open, still waiting. He looked around the room, as if searching for something he couldn't name. She had made sure everything was ready. Nothing left undone, nothing left unsaid, except everything. She wondered if he even noticed how quiet she had become, how much she had buried beneath each silent dinner, each long night waiting. He picked up his last shirt, folded it slowly, and placed it inside. The suitcase was nearly full now. So was she. Chapter 2. Scent of Change. The scent drifted through the room like a ghost. Sharp, sudden, unforgettable. It was his cologne. She had almost forgotten it. That small glass bottle, tucked away for years, now open again as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Everything was about to. She didn't look at him, not directly. She just stood still, eyes fixed on the window, lips gently pressed together. But inside, her mind stirred. Her heart began to ache. That scent, it pulled her back to a day long ago, their wedding day, the first and only time he had worn it. She remembered thinking back then that it didn't suit him. It was too strong, too foreign, too much like something borrowed from another man's world. But she said nothing, just like always. A wife didn't correct her husband. A good woman stayed silent, smiled when spoken to, worked hard, and asked for nothing. The room smelled like the past now. Not a happy past, but one wrapped in rituals and expectations. And still she let it sit there in the air between them. He didn't seem to notice how it affected her. He never did. He simply folded another shirt, placed it in the suitcase, and moved to the next. She watched his hands, strong and sure. The same hands that once built shelves in the shop, repaired hinges on doors, tucked their blanket in during winter nights. Those same hands were now packing for someone else, for a new bride. One with laughter in her eyes. One who still wore perfume without shame or fear. She had never worn perfume. What use was fragrance to a woman who lived to work, not to be noticed? And wasn't it said, by aunts, neighbors, even strangers on the street, that married women who wore perfume were trying to catch other men? That kind of woman had no place in a proper household. And she had always been proper. A good wife, a loyal woman, a silent heart. But now the perfume of his cologne filled the room like a cruel joke, as if to remind her of all the things she had never been, never dared to be. She took a slow breath, but the scent only pressed deeper into her chest. It wasn't just a smell, it was a warning, a sign. Something was changing, something permanent. She picked up the cover of a pillow, pretending to inspect it, pretending it needed washing, but her fingers shook slightly as she folded the fabric. If he noticed, he didn't say. The silence stretched. It wasn't just about the cologne. It wasn't even about the suitcase. It was about what both of those things now meant. She wanted to ask him, "When did you stop seeing me?" But no words came. Instead, she smoothed the pillow again and nodded at his shirt. "That one's clean," she said quietly. He looked at her, then turned back to the suitcase. The scent lingered. So did her fear. This time she felt it in her bones. This was not a temporary shift. This wasn't about a trip or business or convenience. This was the beginning of something else. Something that would not include her in the same way anymore. And still she said nothing, even as her throat tightened, even as her heart whispered, "Speak just this once. Speak." But the moment passed, just like the scent would, and she remained, still, silent, sinking into the weight of what she could no longer hold on to. Chapter 3. Words never spoken. The words were there, alive, burning, waiting, but her lips wouldn't move. They crowded at the edge of her mouth like children begging to be set free, but something stronger held them back. Something older, something shaped by years of being quiet, being obedient, being good. She sat on the edge of the bed again, her hands resting on her lap, her fingers interlaced tightly. Outside, the city hummed with the ordinary. But inside this small room, time stood still, holding its breath. He moved across the floor, folding, checking, zipping, focused, unbothered, packing as though it were a business trip, a task. Just one of many, and maybe it was for him. But for her, it was everything. The breaking point of years spent swallowing her voice. She tried again to speak, to ask him, why her? Why now? Why am I not enough anymore? But even the attempt sat like a stone in her throat. He didn't look at her. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he knew what sat behind her silence, or maybe he didn't want to know. They had never spoken about feelings. Not once. Not when she cried quietly at night. Not when her body ached from work. Not even when she had lost their first child and sat for days by the window, unable to eat. He had brought her food then, left it beside her without a word, then returned to the shop. He thought that was care. Maybe for him it was. But now, the weight of all the unsaid things throbbed inside her chest like an old bruise. She wanted to scream, "I am still here. I am still your wife." She wanted to beg, "Don't leave me behind in this house like a broom in the corner." But the words never came. Instead, she said nothing. She pressed her hands harder together. Maybe if she held them tightly enough, they could hold back the tears too. He glanced around the room. One final check. His eyes briefly met hers. For a moment, she thought, maybe now. Maybe he'll come sit beside her. Maybe he'll say he's sorry. Maybe he'll ask her how she feels. Maybe. But he didn't. He looked away. She studied the lines of his face, the same face she had memorized over years of shared silence. It hadn't changed much, just heavier now, tired, determined. She wondered if her face had changed too, if her silence had carved marks across her skin. "You'll be back in 2 days?" she asked softly. He paused. "Yes," he said, not quite meeting her gaze. That was all. A question soaked in ache, an answer wrapped in avoidance. She pressed her lips together, sealing in 1,000 unsaid sentences. They buzzed behind her eyes like bees behind glass. If she could say only one thing, just one, "I'm afraid," would he stay? Would he hear her? But the words never came. They had grown too used to being locked away. They no longer trusted her voice. He picked up the suitcase, nodding once. "I'll be back soon." She nodded too. And with that, he turned away. The door creaked open. The sound of his shoes echoed down the hallway. Then came the final click of the door closing behind him. She sat still. Not a single word had been spoken that truly mattered. And yet her chest felt hollow, as if she had just said goodbye to her whole life. Chapter 4. The Other Wife. He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. The way his voice lifted slightly when he spoke about the hotel, the ceremony, the way his eyes avoided hers when he mentioned how young she was, all of it was enough. She stood still, her hands busying themselves with a pillowcase, pulling it off with more care than necessary. As if by focusing on the fabric she could ignore the fact that another woman, a girl really, was about to step into her life. Into their life. "She's only 19, he said casually, almost like he was commenting on the weather. Young, but strong, bright eyes. She heard every word, and every word chipped away at the silence she had built inside her for years. 19. She remembered herself at 19. Her hair was longer then, her hands smoother, her eyes perhaps a little brighter. She had never been called beautiful, not even then. But she had been called dependable, quiet, hard-working, the kind of woman who could raise sons and run a household without complaint. That was enough, wasn't it? It had been enough for him once. "She has big eyes," he added. "Very bright, happy eyes." She said nothing. She smoothed the sheet in her hands and folded it neatly. Inside, her chest burned. Not with anger, she wasn't allowed anger, but with something colder, something hollow. He was trying to be gentle in his own way. She knew that. But gentleness didn't soften betrayal, and silence could no longer shield her from the truth. She could picture the girl without effort, smooth skin, laughter like bells, eyes that hadn't yet learned to hide sadness. She was probably excited, probably pecking her own things now. New clothes, bright colors, maybe even a bottle of real perfume. What did she know of sacrifice? Of being a wife without being seen? "She'll help with the shop," he said. "You won't have to do everything yourself anymore." Her fingers stopped folding. She wanted to say, "I never asked for help." She wanted to say, "I built that shop with you. My life is inside those walls." She wanted to say, "You're not bringing her here to help. You're bringing her here to replace," but she said none of it. He believed he was giving her something, relief, a company, a companion. He believed, perhaps, that this was a kindness. What he didn't understand, what he had never understood, was that love was not about what could be measured, not about how many hands worked in the shop or how many suns filled a home. Love was about being seen, being heard, and she had been invisible to him for years. Still, her face remained unchanged. She had trained it well. No emotion showed, not pain, not pride. He looked at her one more time, smiling gently. "Not every man is fortunate enough to have two good wives," he said. "It's a great day for our family." A great day. She smiled too, a soft practice smile, the kind you wear at funerals. He didn't notice the difference. As he turned away to lift his suitcase, the scent of cologne trailed after him once more. And as the door opened, she stood there, face calm, heart quietly collapsing. Chapter 5. Dust of yesterday. The door closed quietly behind him. No final glance, no goodbye kiss, just the soft click that echoed louder than any shout could. She stood frozen, listening to the silence he left behind. It wasn't new to her. This silence, it had lived in their home for years, creeping between the walls, curling around dinner plates, sleeping between them in the bed. But now it felt different. Heavy. Final. Slowly, she walked to the bed, the place where he had sat just moments before, folding shirts, zipping his suitcase, speaking of another life with another woman. She picked up a pillow and looked at it, not seeing the fabric, but something else. The imprint of a man she had once loved, or perhaps simply lived with. She peeled off the pillowcase, her fingers trembling slightly. "It needs washing," she whispered, though no one was there to hear, not even herself, just the walls, the furniture, and the ghosts of yesterdays. Her movements were small and careful. Cleaning helped, it always had. Scrubbing floors, wiping counters, folding sheets. Tasks that didn't demand questions or give answers. Tasks that didn't ask how she felt. Because feelings, well, they were a luxury she had never learned to afford. She took the bedding one piece at a time, folding it, smoothing it, as though order could be restored in neat corners and clean surfaces. As though washing the pillowcases could erase the last few hours or the last few years. Each motion was a quiet rebellion against the storm rising inside her. But it was still there, the ache that settled deep in her bones, in her chest, in her throat where words once wanted to rise. Her hands moved, but her heart stood still. The cologne still lingered in the air like a stranger who refused to leave. She closed her eyes for a moment and let herself breathe in, one last time. It smelled of weddings and beginnings, of promises made quietly, of a man who once smiled at her like she was enough. Now he smiled at someone else. She touched the corner of the bed gently as if it were delicate, as if it could break. Or maybe she was the one about to break. "He'll be back," she reminded herself. "He said just 2 days." But when he returned, it would not be the same. The air would carry new footsteps. The rooms would echo with someone else's laughter. Another woman would wear perfume here. Another pair of hands would touch the same pillowcases, the same cups, the same man. Still she folded. Still she cleaned. Still she stood in place, like a statue carved by expectation and silence. Outside, the sun continued to rise. The world kept turning, but inside, she held a fading piece of yesterday in her hands. And no amount of washing could make it new again. Chapter 6. Today is a great day. "Today is a great day for our family," he said with pride swelling in his chest. He stood tall at the doorway, the old suitcase in his hand, its leather edges worn, its lock a little rusted, but he held it like a treasure, like something that had never failed him. Just like her. She didn't speak, only nodded. Not because she agreed, but because silence had always been safer than truth. He smiled again, wide and full of importance. "Not every man is rich enough to have 2 wives," he added. "We're lucky." Lucky. She turned away slightly, just enough to hide her face, not that it mattered. He never looked close enough to notice. He was already stepping into a future she wasn't invited to, not really. A future that smelled of jasmine perfume and sounded like laughter too young to understand what it meant to be chosen second or third. Behind her eyes, a storm built slowly, steadily, but her face remained a still lake. It always had. She had wanted to say something, anything, but she couldn't remember how. The words had been buried long ago, beneath years of washing, cooking, folding, serving. Her love had never been loud. It was boiled rice at midnight, warm tea in sickness, quiet strength when the world outside turned cold. And now, that love was being passed over unnoticed, like the old suitcase. Reliable, sturdy, but replaceable. She thought of the girl, the second wife, the new flower in their fading garden. 19, he had said. Beautiful, bright-eyed, still unbruised by expectation. Would she learn to smile without speaking? Would she too one day nod while swallowing the ache in her throat? The question stayed in her chest. He adjusted his collar, smoothed his hair. "I'm late," he muttered, already turning the doorknob. Still, she watched him. Still, she hoped, though for what she didn't know, that he might stop, that he might notice, that he might see her, really see her one last time. But he didn't. He never had. She forced a soft smile. "Your suitcase," she whispered. "It's old. You need a new one." He paused, grateful for the comment. Grateful it wasn't something else. Grateful she hadn't asked him to stay. "Perhaps I will," he said with relief, not looking back. After all. The door clicked shut behind him, and she stood there alone, not just in the room, but in a marriage that had long ago packed its bags and left. He called it a celebration. She called it loss, but said nothing, because for women like her, even grief must be quiet. Chapter 7. The door closes. The suitcase stood near the door, upright and ready, like a loyal companion waiting for its next journey. He adjusted his jacket, brushed invisible dust from his shoulder, and glanced around the room one last time. Not out of sentiment, but to make sure he had packed everything. She stood near the bed, quiet as always, not out of weakness, but out of habit. A habit formed over years of swallowing her feelings, folding them neatly into silence, like clean linen into drawers no one ever opened. He smiled at her. A small, polite smile. The kind one gives to a neighbor or a shopkeeper, not the kind that once made her heart flutter. That smile had vanished long ago, packed away like his wedding suit, only brought out for ceremonies. "I suppose I'm ready," he said, more to himself than to her. She nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "You are." Her eyes drifted to the suitcase again, so old, so used, so familiar, like her. There were 100 things she could have said. "Stay. Don't go. I still love you. I'll work harder. I'll wear perfume if that's what it takes. I'll be anything you need, just not this forgotten woman in the corner of your life." But instead she stepped closer and said gently, It's a good suitcase, but maybe it's time for a new one. He looked up, surprised. The comment caught him off guard, not because it was strange, but because it was kind, because it wasn't a plea or an argument. It was something else, a gift, a blessing, a goodbye wrapped in understanding. He studied her face for a second longer than usual. Still the same face, neither soft nor hard, unreadable, yet full of everything he never bothered to read. "Perhaps," he said, "perhaps I will." And then he turned the doorknob. She wanted to speak again, to say something more, but the words wouldn't come. Or maybe they lived only in her eyes now, in the way she watched him as though watching a chapter close, not with anger, not even with sorrow, just with the quiet dignity of a woman who had given everything and expected nothing in return. He stepped outside. The suitcase rolled behind him, wheels tapping softly against the floor, and then the door closed. Click. That sound. Small, simple, final. She stood there for a moment, her hands still, her lips slightly parted. Then, slowly, she turned back to the room. The silence settled in once again. Not empty, but full of all the things they never said. And yet, in her heart, something stirred. Not hope, not grief, just the strength of having loved, deeply, silently, and with grace, even as the door closed behind him.